We'll go ahead and get started, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, and welcome to Social Legacy at Work. My name is Jen Cotton, and I am a 1999 MBA graduate, and I join you virtually today from Chicago. As a proud member of the Simon Women's Alliance Board, I am pleased to be hosting this session and so grateful we can offer all of you this talk today. Emily Chang, class of 1998 and 2000 MBA, is the CEO of McCann Worldgroup, China. And prior to accepting this new role, she took a year off to write a book called The Spare Room: Define Your Social Legacy to Live a More Intentional Life and Lead with Authentic Purpose. This was the topic of her first TED Talk. And before that, she served as CMO for Starbucks China, where she was responsible for marketing, sales, loyalty, customer engagement, and the digital ecosystem. Programs like this are one of the bonuses of our new virtual world. Emily is joining us from Shanghai, while Simon alums, students, and prospective students from around the world are able to enjoy it live. One note before turning it over to Emily, please utilize the Q&A box throughout the presentation. And after Emily's remarks, we'll open the floor for questions and we'll address them. And apologies up front for any technical difficulties. This is the new world we're living in. So now I'll turn it over to Emily. The mic is yours.
Thanks so much, Jen. And hi, everyone. I also apologize in advance because we don't exactly know what's going to happen around the world. And with what Jen and I were just saying is sort of prime time Friday night in Shanghai. But thanks so much for having me. I was asked today to share a little bit with you guys about the book, the concept behind it, what is social legacy, what it means at work, and then really spend almost more than half the time just in Q&A, answering your questions and engaging directly. So I hope that works for you guys. And I'm really looking forward to this next hour. So since Jen did such a great job introducing me and my background, what I'll start with is The Spare Room. I mean, this is still kind of surreal that I'm holding this book here and it's like one I wrote. And I know, sometimes have like ghostwriters or people will collaborate. This was just a passion project. And actually, before I even get to the book, I guess I'll share, I really encourage you guys to try and do something you don't know how to do or something that you've never done before. I used to call it novicehood. And every year I try to pick something that I don't think I can do, whether it's running a marathon or that I've never tried before, like playing the cajon drum or writing a book. And I think the reason it's so good is it teaches you to become comfortable with discomfort, where you sit every day and you're like, I don't know what to do next. I don't know how to do this. I don't know if I'm good at it. Talk about imposter syndrome. You sit down every day with your dog by your side, writing a book, thinking, I don't even know if I can write. I don't know if this is interesting. Do other authors have thesaurus.com up all the time? But anyway, it was actually a very smooth process. I first started just wanting to capture some of the stories from our spare room. That's obviously the title of the book. So over the last 21 years, my family has taken care of 16 babies, kids, and young adults in our home. And it's never been through a fostering program. It's always just been kids have shown up. Every single one has come through a different route. Some were introduced to us. Some my husband met. One literally like ran by the street in front of our house in Arkansas. We've just met them in all different kinds of ways. And, maybe we can talk later in the Q&A about how they just keep showing up and why I think that is. But in the meantime, I was thinking it'd be amazing to capture some of these stories. We've had babies with hydrocephalus who came to our home to die. We've had child brides who got married underage and then were essentially trapped in a marriage that they wanted to get out of and legally couldn't. We've had all kinds and shapes of people. My 12-year-old daughter has had older and younger siblings, boys and girls. And then as I started writing the book, it kind of evolved, and I think that's maybe my second lesson. Not that I was asked to give lessons, but I kind of can't help it. And they come up along the way. So the first one is novicehood. The second one is to be agile and kind of go with where projects evolve. Because I did find an agent and the agent was encouraging me to kind of put reflective exercises at the end of each chapter, which is not just how to think about your social legacy, but how do you encourage somebody else to actually tangibly take action? So I thought that was really good advice. And it became sort of a memoir / reflection / call to action. And then we signed up with a publisher who's so brilliant and fantastic. And they said, we love your stories. And we kind of think that if you broaden the aperture to more people's stories across different industries, different levels, maybe even different countries, it might be more broadly appealing because our stories tend to be, somewhat extreme. I think that's just sort of what our family has been called to do. So now it is a combination of about 15 stories over 5 chapters. And then the sixth chapter is sort of the closing piece. So, what is a social legacy? Well, in chapter 1, I talk about your offer. And then chapter 2 is your offense. Imagine a simple Venn diagram. In the middle of your offense and your offer is your social legacy. So, your offer is that thing that you are uniquely gifted or equipped to provide or contribute to the world. It can be a number of things. And I give you 3 different stories, including my own as the first part of the chapter, and then a series of reflective exercises that help you kind of think through, like, well, what's my offer? And I would guess at least half the people listening are like, yeah, I probably know what I offer. It could be time, it could be a talent, it could be a certain personality trait. What is it that draws people to you? What is it that folks tend to come to you for? There are lots of different ways to think about your offer. And then the second chapter is your offense. When do you realize that thing that offends you more than everything else? In the course of a day, I get offended by how much plastic I see thrown on the side of the street. I get offended by seeing stray animals not treated well on my way to work. I get offended by a lot of things, but there's one thing that sort of stops you in your tracks over all others. That's your offense. So when you find the intersection of your offer and your offense, you end up at what I'm calling your social legacy. So you can call it purpose. Other people have asked me, why didn't you use that word? And I guess I don't have an aversion to it. I feel purpose is sometimes so overarching or amorphous or maybe even overused that I was trying to interrogate the idea and say, what do I really want to say? And frankly, it's the idea of leaving something better than I found it. It's that simple, right? For us, it was just a couple of young people, and I hope that we made their lives better and they can make other lives better. And it's an amplification. For others, you might be touching millions of people or the world. I mean, look at Greta. She can, sail around the world and impact every person who has access to media. We all touch different people in different ways, but that social part, the first word, defines your sort of sphere of influence. And some of it may just happen based on what you do. Others, you may define it. So social could be online or it could be offline. It could be your home, your neighborhood, your workplace. It can be your country, or it could be the earth. So how do you think about your social legacy? That's the core concept of the book. And I'll tell you my own. So my offer is a combination of a couple of things. It does seem odd that I need to look it up, doesn't it? Well, the reason is there's this chapter I'll kind of show you. So this is the part where you kind of pull together your offer and your offense. And after I've gone through the exercise myself, the couple of things in my offer, you probably saw a lot of words, are things like hospitality, a unified family, humor and fun, agility, and contribution. And these are sort of self-reflections on the things that I think make up who I uniquely am and what I can offer people around me. And then my offense, I wrote as children and young people who are abused, neglected, vulnerable, or marginalized. And then I also mentioned around the world and particularly in the communities where I live and work. And then in the middle, so knowing my offer and my offense, what I wrote as my social legacy is providing good kibun for those in our spare room. So you might be wondering what kibun is. There is a chapter for the oldest person who stayed in our spare room. His name is Jishin. He's Korean, and he was finishing his schooling in Shanghai when he was basically defrauded out of all of his real estate money, and he was going to have to go home without finishing his degree. So he finished his last 6 months living with us. And one day he was staying in our home, and Minky, my husband, and I were talking to him, and he just had this sort of satisfied sigh. And I said, "What?" And he said, it's good kibun. And I said, I don't know what that means. And it's a Korean word. And he said, there's really not a great direct translation in English, but kibun, he defined as a comfort for the spirit. And I thought that was such a lovely idea. And that's really what I want to provide. We have a spare room. We have a sense of hospitality. It's easy for us to open our home, and it may not be for you, but there's something else equally easy for you. And then the offense is taking care of people who just need that safe haven for a while. And then the intersection is, yeah, comfort for the spirit for people who need it. And then I'll take that idea, my social legacy of comfort for the spirit, and parlay it into the workplace. the question that Kate had asked me is, why does social legacy help you become a better leader? Or what does social legacy in the workplace look like? I will say a couple of things. The first one is having identified that I want comfort for the spirit. That means I want people around me to feel spiritually comfortable. We've been talking so much about DE and I lately, right? If you think about diversity as being included in the dance, inclusion is being asked to dance. Well, then belonging is feeling so free that you can dance like no one's watching, right? So I guess in some ways, when I wrote this, good kibun, which is having a comfort for the spirit, the idea is you can feel so spiritually comfortable with us. You feel like we're part of your family, that our home is your home. Um, One of our closest friends, and in fact, they stayed in our apartment just for about a month for separate circumstances with their two little kids. The youngest daughter is so cute. When she came into our apartment, maybe 2 years later after they'd moved out, she came in, lay down on the couch, and took a deep breath, a whiff, went, and I said, "What are you doing?" And she said, "It smells like home." And it was so sweet and genuine. And it just really brought to life what that means, that you feel comfort for the spirit when you're in my home and when you're around me. And of course, that matters at work because I look after a team of about 400 people and I want them to feel comfort for the spirit. One thing I love about McCann is we talk about our corporate values as big. BIG. Now, check this out. How many corporate values I've looked at over 22 years? B is being brave, I is demonstrating integrity, and G is exhibiting a spirit of generosity. Those are our corporate values. How amazing is that? If you think about it, brave, integrity, and generous, that is the makings of a comfort for the spirit. So my job, I see it as to be completely congruent with my job at home, which is the social legacy. It's how do I create comfort for the spirit? How do I build a work culture of good kibun? So I guess that's the first answer to the question, which is what is social legacy at work? Two other thoughts. Why is it important to have a social legacy at work? Because it helps us become authentic and it takes down the walls. We always talk about awe. When you look at somebody in a big office or with a big title, you think, oh my gosh, they've made it. They're the big boss. Well, immediately what comes with that is a set of presumptions and a little bit of awe, maybe fear, maybe trepidation, maybe wanting to show up well, or maybe wanting to just stay far away so you don't come in direct contact. But those are not the makings of a great corporate culture or of creating strong relationships. And it definitely doesn't build a great comfort for the spirit. So for me, I see my job as intentionally breaking down that awe, breaking down those walls or the assumptions or the sense of distance. And I think when I have a social legacy, and now even more so because I wrote a book about it. And so you can read all about what I believe, as well as my personal life and my family and the kids we've taken care of. It makes me become real. I was thinking about the Velveteen Rabbit the other day because I made my daughter some pillows when she was little with quotes from my favorite children's books. And there is something about it, like when you're loved enough, you become real. I think when you demonstrate enough love, the other way around, or when you prove that your actions are there to back up your words, you do become more of an authentic leader. I think it allows people to see you as a human being. They may not like you. Not everyone's going to like you or want to be your friend, but they could respect you and recognize you're more than a CEO. You're more than a marketing director or a research leader. You are a human being. And that breaks those things down and helps people get to see you a little bit more as a human being. And I think when we see each other as human beings, a lot of other misconceptions and a lot of other assumptions and judgments are more easily pushed to the wayside. So that's the second thing. And then I guess the last thing about social legacy at work is a sense of prioritization. So I get asked a lot, how can you do all of this stuff where you still have a 12-year-old, you're working a kind of big job. I have a long commute, by the way, as well. So I have like 2.5 hours on the road every day. And then, we just launched this book. Well, I guess my answer is I'm very intentional with my priorities because I know that the spare room is my thing. Good kibun is what I offer. And that's my social legacy wherever I am at work and at home. It helps me prioritize. So if somebody needs me, if somebody's upset, last week, if one of our younger directors came to me in tears, it doesn't matter what's on my calendar. She's the priority. It makes decision-making really easy as a leader in the workplace because I know what matters to me. Or today, I'll give a live example. So today I had a meeting with my CFO and my head of HR. That's a pretty big, important meeting. And we're talking about some serious subjects. But we just left a client meeting where some of my younger guys, and they're all women, they just killed it. I was so proud of them that I texted my team. I said, I'm just going to have to miss the next meeting, the big, important meeting, so that I could take these ladies out to lunch and celebrate them. These decisions become really easy, and because work will always expand to the space that you allow it. Nothing is ever going to feel like you have enough time for it or that you have enough capacity for it. So you have to be on your front foot. Don't take your schedule and your priorities and the demands of everyone around you on your back foot. Lean into it, be proactive, and make decisions on the things that matter to you. Did we have that catch up later on, the three of us? Yes, of course. But I also got to have a wonderful lunch with a group of vibrant young women. And I hope it helped them feel not only valued, respected, and seen, but that they were the most important thing for that hour. So that's a little bit about the spare room book, about the social legacy, and just sort of three thoughts on how the social legacy impacts me at work and how I leverage it or lean on it at work and at home. And I think I was supposed to go till 9:25, so that's pretty good. I'm going to pause there and just see if we want to go to question and answer.
Thank you, Emily. That was really inspiring. We'll give it a minute. It looks like we have a question for you. What are the top 3 books that you would have gifted the most aside from the spare room?
Okay. I like database questions because you don't have to think too much. Okay. One that I buy in droves is The First 90 Days. I buy it for everybody who's promoted. I just think it's a great book. I've honestly read it multiple times. In fact, with that group of young women today, I was telling them to get abstract because with Get Abstract, you get a 3 to 5 page summary of all business books. And I mean, 9 out of 10 times it gets the point. But The First 90 Days to me is one book that is worth reading and rereading, and it has exercises. Maybe those exercises inspired my own in some ways because they're very actionable, they're tangible, and they really cause you to think a little bit deeper. I hate a question that's like sort of so self-evident that you don't even have the intention to pick up your pen and write an answer, you know? So The First 90 Days is one. Like Water for Chocolate was my favorite book for about 30 years. I love that book. So I've gifted that book a lot as well. And then I guess the third book I've gifted the most, I still have 3 sitting on my bookshelf, is Kafka on the Shore. I just think that's a brilliant book. So from my books, other than The First 90 Days, which is very practical, the other 2 are whimsical, inventive, creative, sort of extraordinary different places. And I think sometimes, that's what media should do for us, is transport us, but also cause us to think differently. Because I read something recently that I buy into a lot. And I was talking to my daughter about this, that we are the sum of the inputs that we receive. And that doesn't mean that we're like empty USBs, right? We're not empty hard drives, but we are influenced, whether intentionally or not, by everything we take in. So I was telling my daughter, we want to be really careful about what we're listening to, what we're exposing ourselves to. Frankly, we were like talking about what news stations we should be listening to. And, maybe there isn't one. Maybe we want to listen to news that comes from different angles because we'll broaden our own aperture.
I think that's I totally agree. I think the book question is always a good one. I think it's a really a view into someone's soul and how they kind of think about things and their interests. And so I find it fascinating to ask people often what they're reading. So thank
Thanks,
you for that.
Great question.
Okay, here's another one. What's your take on the changing agency role in China and in-housing trend? How can agency add value to brands nowadays? So a little bit of a shift from the book.
Yeah. And then, let me start with the second one first, and then I'll get to the first one second. So how do agencies add value? So a lot of people have asked me, okay, you've been on the client side for like 20 some years. Why would you go to the agency side? And my first answer is I didn't choose to go to the agency side. I chose McCann. And the reason is when I wrote the book, I kind of called it #professional halftime. I said, look, I've worked for 20 some years. I've got another 20 some ahead probably. So in the middle, let me take this break. And I think I would highly encourage everyone to take a halftime at some point, or maybe it's a quarter time or a trimester. I don't know, whatever that looks like, because it helps you really reflect and do something really different. It helps you come back totally re-energized. And I think that break is really important too, because you may be on a path and that may not be where you want to keep going. Or it may be where you want to keep going. Frankly, I was completely satisfied. So it wasn't that I needed to take a different direction. But in writing the book, and the time issue was more, I was afraid I was going to forget some of the stories because some of them are like 20 years old now. And so I'd just been jotting them down over time. But as I thought about what job do I want in the back half, I'll tell you, most headhunters lead with one question, which is, what region are you open to? The second question they ask you is, what industry do you want to be in? Well, I've worked in different regions and I've really loved every industry I've been in. So neither of those questions is particularly helpful to me. So I decided to not take any calls, because trying to explain to a headhunter that I'm not that ambitious, that I don't really care about industry or region or title, like, here's what I want. I want something really interesting to do. And then I want to keep learning. And I kept saying, like, apparently I think in Venn diagrams, right? It's a Venn diagram and it's super simple for me. If I'm in the heart of contributing, feeling like I'm adding value to my organization and learning, I'm super, super happy. But headhunters don't know what to do with that. So I sort of stopped and reflected and went back. I went back to like all the Myers-Briggs I've done and all the strengths finders. And I read all these things from like 20 years. And I tried to assess the things that give me the most joy, the places in which I thrive, and like the ingredients to my favorite jobs and favorite moments. And the model I came up with, and everyone's going to have their own, but I encourage you to come up with yours, because it again helps you lean into something with much more intention. For me, it was head, heart, and soul. I realized I really want to be intellectually challenged. I love really hard things. I like when my ambitions exceed my resources, where I'm like, how am I going to do this? Or where my aspirations exceed my capability, where I'm like, I actually don't think I can do this. That's really fun for me. And it's not just doing one job and then feeling like it's done and then let's just sit back and enjoy. I want it to constantly be hard. That's what challenges me, unfortunately, for me and my family. That's what, where I thrive. And then my heart is, I love supporting people. That's why I'm here on a Friday night while my family's down there watching a movie and fighting on my Wi-Fi bandwidth, because I love teaching and I love encouraging, and I love, finding that people feel that they've learned something, or they're inspired, or they're a little bit better. That's my contribution. And then my soul is, I just wrote a book called The Spare Room, and it's all about social legacy. So I want to work somewhere where I can live into that fully and not have to be apologetic about it. And so when you think about those three things, I thought about nonprofit when I went soul first. And then I wasn't always sure the intellect was going to be entirely challenged. I thought about startups. Some of them recruited me and they were super interesting. And a couple have just gone to IPO. And I will admit, for a hot second, I was like, but I don't think the soul was 100% there. And I think the heart would have been really difficult. It's very hard to create a nurturing environment when you're racing 18 hours a day. So I really thought about all these things. And ultimately, when I saw the McCann opportunity, it was perfect. I'm working in the heart of digital space. That's never going to get boring. It changes every day and I can barely keep up. I get to lead a team of about 400, which is not super big compared to my old teams, but big enough that I can have an impact. And, like today, just take 4 young ladies out to lunch and have a great time. And hopefully they go into their weekend smiling, feeling like, oh, this is the place I want to be and where I'm contributing and I feel valued. And then the soul, I just talked about the corporate values of big. When I saw that, I was like, wow, I'm all in. And I still remember my boss's second interview question. The first time I met him, the first question was, tell me about yourself. The second question was, and I quote, in our company, a spirit of generosity is really important. What do you think about that? And I was like, I'll tell you what I think about that. That's great. So Ned, to answer your second question, I think I was really interested to join McCann. And that intellectual challenge of what value does an advertising agency add today? Well, we have to be really careful about how we categorize ourselves, because I would say McCann is not an advertising agency. In fact, that's one of our first few introductory slides these days, because I look after McCann Worldgroup, which has McCann Erickson, very well known for their creative and their strategy. We also have MRM, a total kick-ass digital agency, McCann Relationship Marketing, digital CRM, CDP, marketing automation, lots of cool stuff. We have Craft, which is a production house. And we also have McCann Health. So think about like 4 great agencies, sort of everything you need, nothing you don't, So thinking about how to leverage these teams together, then I'm going to go back to your first question. in terms of this trend of in-housing to become a trusted partner for clients. I essentially get the amazing opportunity to become the partner I was looking for the last 10 years and I couldn't find because there was in-housing. I will admit, when I was the CCO of IHG, I fired my media agency completely. And I said, I'm going to do it myself. And I was super proud of the fact that I hired two very smart programmatic media people. I consulted with a trader, and then we stood it up and saved millions of dollars. Yes, I did. I think other partners and friends have definitely in-housed. But here's what I'll tell you after in-housing. It's not sustainable. I truly don't believe it is, because you in-house part of it, but creatives benefit from seeing the world and working on different businesses. And when you're working on one business all the time within the constraints of one corporate culture versus in an agency environment that's much more open and fluid, I think I've been just talking to a number of people, they're really struggling. They almost always end up going back to the agency. But more importantly, for me as a leader, I find that it's also not sustainable because I'm spending so much time managing an agency and I'm managing multiple small agencies, because you don't in-house 100%, which now means you have some sort of a more traditional agency partner, you have some sort of, marketing automation vendors or agencies, and then you have this in-house. So now you're managing a suite of partners or vendors. You also have a day job, right? Including supply chain and retail distribution and pricing and promotions and everything else that comes with your day job. So I find that the first impact is the leader starts becoming stretched too thin and not leaning into their core capabilities and what they're really there to do. The second thing I see as an outcome is your brand starts to slowly become diluted over time, because it either gets stale working with one in-house or it's cut across a couple of different people who hold on to it. When one hands to another, something drops in between, and it's never perfect, right? Because it's not one single architect model. So those are the couple things that really struck me. I believe personally very strongly that the market is going to pivot back and people are going to be like, wow, in-housing is super expensive. I can't keep great people, or I have really good people, but after 2 years, they're also not the best anymore. So how do I find that right partner outside who can be the trusted partner, but is not a traditional 4As, right? Who understands strategy and can lead thinking for me and be by my side and build amazing creative, but also understand the digital ecosystem better than me because they're in it all day long. And they can bring to me the best in class ideas. They can land it and be accountable for that ROI and for the daily execution. That's the partner I think people need. And that's what I'm building.
I think that's a very, very broad response to that. And I think one of the things that you mentioned that I think is a key takeaway is that, things shift, views shift over time, right? So just because it's one way today doesn't mean that it's not going to shift back to another way of thought. But I think your perspective is really helpful on that. I'm going to shift back to the book and your passion and your soul. Someone asked, and I think this is probably really key for new graduates or maybe even prospective students. You have a lot of time and energy to do these things. You've figured out how to do them. You're now in a position where you probably have more flexibility to commit yourself to the social legacy. What about for people who start out in their careers and maybe they don't have as much flexibility? How should they be thinking about creating social legacy and working that into their job or family when they maybe don't have as much flexibility?
I don't think anyone has flexibility built in. Like, who has that job? We were just watching Ocean's 13 downstairs. Maybe the guy who gets to rate hotels 5 stars and just goes and stays in them and rates them. But no, I don't think anybody has that kind of flexibility. I think we create it. And I wouldn't say this job has more flexibility or my title or my tenure. I would say I've learned over time how to make that time and carve it out. I would say also, like the first kid I had in my apartment, I didn't even have a spare room. It was a studio apartment. I was 20. And I was working 3 jobs and putting myself through undergrad, living in a cheap studio apartment. So, if that person can do it, anyone can. And I'm not saying I was a good person. I kind of fell into it. I couldn't walk away from somebody who was hurt. And, I didn't say yes to 7 months of her living on my couch. Actually, I just bought her dinner, and then the dinner turned into an overnight, and then the overnight turned into a week, and then she stayed on. I think that the reason I share that is we can stretch beyond what we can possibly imagine. If you had asked me, would you consider adopting a special needs boy who will forever be very challenged and need your help and ongoing medical care? I would have been like, wow, I don't know. Our family travels a lot. I'm super active, but we were prepared to do that with Teo, the little boy who lived with us for the longest period of time, and lovingly do it, because I think your life expands toward that space. And I would say this as well: when you don't feel that you have flexibility, when you're in the heart of your social legacy, you're the heart of what you believe you're uniquely created to do. It's not this, how am I going to carve out an hour every week to read to somebody, or how am I going to get to the soup kitchen on Thanksgiving? Like, it's not a requirement. It's not something that feels sacrificial. Rather, it's something very joyful, and it gives an abundance. It is very, very magical. Like, when I take time on a Friday to talk with you guys, I promise you, like, I'm going to get everything done this weekend, and I'm still going to have amazing time with my family. I know it will happen. I don't exactly know how. The math doesn't always seem to work in hours, but it does, because you're living in joy. So I think it's less about trying to find the time or the flexibility. It's identifying the heart of what that thing is. And then how does it integrate to everything that you're doing?
Yeah, that's great advice. Another question is, have you ever been disappointed by a person you tried to help? And how did you overcome that? Great
Oh, for
question.
sure. I mean, I mean, if you're trying to help somebody because you want them to appreciate you're probably not doing it for the right reasons, and you're going to be very disappointed. I think that's why I go back to this idea of giving in joy and finding the abundance in it, because you can't be doing it for somebody to pat you on the back or to be like, wow, you're a good person. In fact, you kind of want the opposite. If you're doing it because you feel this is what you were made to do, you rest in a deeper confidence and a joy, even if in the moment you may not feel happy. You know the difference between, like, in a moment of happiness and a deeper, like, abiding joy. So the last girl who lived in our spare room, I called her Lotus, in the teeny room with her mom, who was a prostitute. Her dad was the pimp who owned the unit. So it was a dirt floor, right? This is not high end, whatever you might imagine from the movies. And she didn't even have a light. She didn't have a desk. So she would lie on the floor of the dirt floor, while her mom was working on the bed, and try to do her homework in the dark. Like that's where this girl grew up. So she's not got the manners or the hygiene that we would be accustomed to. She's not gracious. She's been bullied and abused her whole life. She's seen things nobody should ever see as an adult. So she was the toughest person I've ever lived with and worked with. And she tried to press every single button, right? So I was at IHG and then later at Starbucks when she was with us. And those are big jobs. I was exhausted. I did not have flexibility or free time. And yet we still had her in our home. I'd come home, everyone had eaten. She would come in late from school as well, because Chinese schools run really late. And we'd be kind of standing in the kitchen eating leftovers. And she would just be sitting there trying to piss me off the whole time. I remember one day I was so tired. I was so tired. I almost didn't even eat, but I was standing there and just trying to have a few minutes with her. And she was like, Emily, Auntie Emily, why is your hair so short? So back then it was even shorter than this. It was like asymmetrical. And I said, oh, I like it short. I don't know. I'm just trying this new look. She's like, well, I think it looks awful. I mean, women with short hair are either mean or they're gay. So which is it? Are you mean or are you gay? And I was like, I mean, how do you answer that question on a good day? It's 9 p.m. I'm so tired and I just want to smile. So yeah, you have really stressful moments. But what you remind yourself is, I'm giving to her because she needs something and I have it to give. It's that intentionality again. She's not trying to make you mad, really. She's trying to see, are you still going to love me? And she's trying to see, like, is this authentic? Are you going to kick me out like everybody else has? So when you remind yourself of where she's coming from, and most importantly, you ground yourself in what you're here to do, I think it helps you rise above and kind of, it's not rise above. That's not even the right phrase. It's like you crest over it, and then the whole thing just goes away.
Yeah, it's like you look beyond.
Mm.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting really interesting perspective. I want to go back to the question that you posed almost to yourself. You sort of set me up for it, but how did people find you in your social legacy, and how everything, your gift? So how do people find you and your gift? And sort of all works out?
Well, the first girl, like I said, I was driving home from my job. I was teaching at Kaplan Education down the street in upstate New York. Oh, I was at University of Rochester. Y'all. So oh gosh, you guys know exactly where I was. So the Kaplan, I don't know if it's still there. I went back there last year and everything's really different, but I was driving up. Is it Genesee, the road where you turn right into U of R? And if you keep going, you go over the bridge toward RIT. That street, there's a light before you get to the school on the right-hand side. And I used to live, my studio apartment was right over that bridge to the other side. And it was this old, like, it was like an old mansion that's been cut up into lots of little apartments. I don't know if that's still there either, but I was at that light and it was a red light and it was like notoriously long. And so I was sitting there and I looked out the window and I saw a little girl like hunched over on the curb. So it was actually right there, right outside the school where I saw her. And so I just asked her down the street over the bridge. There was like a Perkins or Friendly's. I don't know the difference, but there was one there and I'm pretty sure it's not there anymore. And I just took her to eat at the diner. And then I ended up bringing her across the street into my apartment. I'm pointing as though it's like on a map right here because I can imagine, I can picture it so vividly and you guys probably can too. Anyway, that's the first girl that I met. And then I'll just tell you like a very interesting sequence. So our next door neighbors in an apartment building. So, like the two apartment doors face each other, we would always kind of wave at each other. And our kids were kind of the same age. So sometimes they would play at the playground. This was 2013 or 14, maybe. They had found a little girl who had been born with spina bifida in a place of a one-child policy. The parents had opted not to keep her. And so they ended up taking care of her and they fell in love with her. They have 6 kids of their own. They're amazing. And so when they had decided to go home for the summer to the States, they couldn't take her with them because she doesn't have any paperwork. So they said, look, we don't want to put her back in the orphanage. You guys see her every day. Could you just keep her for the summer? And we're like, for sure. She's so cute. And we were really happy to. And she really wasn't even moving yet. So she's like kind of wiggling on her upper body. Her bottom half was still paralyzed. She had a catheter. Anyway, they came back at the end of their summer vacation and then they brought her home. And because of her, Elsie, we ended up connecting with an orphanage, right? Because we had to know them just in case something happened or if her catheter got infected. And then they called us a little while later and they said, we have a little boy for you. We're like, oh, no, no, no. This is not like a habit. Special needs kids are really challenging to take care of. We're not sure we have the time or the capability. And they said, oh, okay, we understand. And then they called again. They're like, we really feel that this boy is for you and he's dying. So this boy had been born with hydrocephalus, which is a swelling of the head where your cerebral spinal fluid goes up, but it gets stuck and it can't go back down. So the head, because it's still soft as a baby, swells. And his parents had saved up money to try and get him a surgery. They gave him to a doctor who is supposed to install a shunt, like right back here, and it drains that fluid down into your stomach. And then you just pass it through, and then the head sort of shrinks. He drilled a hole in the baby's head, said it was a shunt, and gave the baby back. The baby came home with a hole drilled in his skull, dripping brain matter and just screaming in pain. So the parents had given up everything. Their baby was dying and screaming nonstop. They gave him to an orphanage. The orphanage took one look and they're like, there's no shunt. So they put him in the corner because they have too many babies and not enough people to care for them. And then there's this amazing nonprofit that goes around just to check on babies and try and do what they can, especially for those that are specially abled or who have special needs. And they found this boy and that's the boy they were calling us about. And so they said, look, it's really bad. Like he only just needs a couple days. And we were like, that sounds pretty bad. I don't know if my 4-year-old should really be exposed to that kind of agony. And actually, it was her who talked us into bringing him home. So from Elsie, because of our neighbors across the street, we met the orphanage. The orphanage introduced us to Teo. We had Teo on and off for 5 years. So in total, 3 years of his life was living with us. In between, we were trying to help him find a forever family or a different family. So he was kind of in and out a little bit. My husband would push his wheelchair and walk my daughter to school. And you guys know how it is, wherever you are, you kind of hit the same rhythm with people, whether you just kind of nod and say hello, or you just familiar faces, right? Same routines. One day, Teo ended up with his forever family and a woman just stopped my husband on the street and said, I'm sorry, I don't know you, but I just wanted to know, is your son okay? Because I see him every day. My husband said, oh, he's great. He's okay. He went with a forever family. She said, okay, I just wanted to ask and make sure, because not a lot of people bring out specially abled babies, in like rocky streets of Shanghai. So a few weeks after that, the woman stopped him again and said, sir, you remember me? Can I buy you a cup of coffee? And so they went to across the street from my daughter's school and had a coffee. And she said, well, if you're willing to take in that boy, I wonder if you might take in a girl. She's in my class and I bring her home sometimes on the weekends because I just don't think she's going to live if she has to stay in her home. And that was Lotus, who was living in the brothel. So one sort of led to the other, over time, but not always. I can't trace it all back 16. They come all sorts of different ways. And the reason I share those stories is to say, later, when you identify the heart of what you're willing to do and there's some positivity that comes out of it, I think it finds you. There's
Yeah.
no other explanation, right? For
Yeah.
how these things happen. And for each one of them, I think things have ended really positively. And most importantly, I'll say it was a giving in abundance. Our family is so blessed for having known these guys. We consider, I was talking to Lainey the other day. She said, somebody asked me if I was an only child. And I was like, we have so many people in our family. And then they asked, oh, how many? And she was like, 3. Oh gosh, how do I explain this?
Uh, um, Here's a good question. When you think about you yourself and your values in life, who has been a significant contributor or influential person, friends, family, work? How do you think about your formative years and who you are today?
I feel so incredibly privileged in so many ways. I'll tell you one tangible story of someone who just poured into me and didn't even know me. And then I'll tell you about a life mentor story. So when I was at University of Rochester, Simon School of Business, they had people coming in and doing interviews on campus. And this woman named Paris Watts Stanfield was a finance director at Procter & Gamble. She came and interviewed. And I remember my final interviews were with Procter & Gamble and Reckitt Benckiser. And they were in corporate finance because I studied finance. And the day before we had to make our decisions and everybody kind of flew home, Paris sat down with me and said, I'm going to extend you one of my offers. They come in with a number of offers and they fill it and then off they go. She said, I'm willing to give you one, but I also feel I need to tell you, based on your personality and based on your curiosity, you might want to consider brand management. And I said, very intelligently, what's brand management? And so she kind of explained to me, she said, here's the thing, you're going to have to turn down the finance offer. I'll see if I can fill it tomorrow and then reapply. But I've talked to, his name was Todd Garrett. He's a Simon alum and he was the CIO of Procter & Gamble at the time. I talked to Todd and he's willing to interview you for a marketing role. And that's how I started at Procter & Gamble in my internship in 98 or 99. Because she leaned into a moment where she identified something. And I'm still in touch with her. And I still thank her every time I change jobs 23 years later, right? Because I'm like, if you hadn't done that, I wouldn't be where I am. So I feel like it's important to notice those moments and remember them and thank them, because hopefully that gives back to her a little bit of how much she gave to me in that moment. And then I think life mentors are also really important. I think work mentors are critical. And I met Vivian Bechtold at Procter & Gamble after I'd been there for a couple of years. It was just an amazing story where she was willing to pour into me and help me and coach me. She's one of those honest mentors who will tell you when you're out of line and she'll kind of coach you to be better. And then I met her husband. Her husband really liked my husband. So he started coaching him. Like the four of us would hang out. And then one thing I'll never forget, they had us over to their house for dinner and they're like marketing directors, which was a super big deal, right? We were like tiny nobodies. We're like, oh my gosh, we're going to their house in Cincinnati at Indian Hill. And so we went over for dinner. And then Jim, Vivian's husband, sat down and said, okay, we consider you guys our mentees. We love you. So consider that I'm sharing this to you with love. And we're like, oh, why? What's happening? And he said, you're living apart. You've been apart for 3 years because my husband was at PricewaterhouseCoopers. He's like, that's not really great for a marriage. And you're early in your career. So I know you're working really hard, but you're not building a sustainable future together. And we're like, wow, this is like serious mentorship. And then he said, I don't just want to criticize and I don't want to make you uncomfortable. I'd also like to offer Minky a job so that you can join Procter & Gamble. I know what you do now. I think you're capable. For young people, he was actually the first wave of Pricewaterhouse consultants rolling out SAP when it was new. That was his job. Yes, we are ancient. So Procter & Gamble was also rolling out SAP. And he said, in our MDOs, I don't know what MDO stands for. Anyway, business units, we need somebody to help roll it out, and you're perfectly equipped to do that. And that's how Minky ended up joining the company. And they are now the godparents of our daughter. Wow. And we still stay so closely in touch with them. Like finding those mentors. And then later, when you feel ready to contribute to somebody else, paying it forward and being that kind of mentor to other people, I think that's what makes the world what it is for us. And that's what allows me to be who I am and live the way I do because of people like Paris and Vivian and Jim.
That's amazing. Those are amazing stories. And I think your gratitude is impressive for all that they gave you, whether it was advice or connecting or looking out for you. I think that's mentorship is so important.
It
I think
is.
we have time for maybe one more. This question, I think, and by the way, I loved your analogy for DE and I. I think it's a great way to simplify it and think about it. This question is along those lines, related to being a minority and a woman in the workplace. Have you ever had to face a situation where you feel you were judged by your social identity instead of what or who you are as an individual? And how would you suggest people handle that?
We're judged every day, you guys. And it could be because of the clothes we wear. Like, I'm looking at this angle and this neckline is super not flattering. Like, was this the right thing to wear for this event? Probably not. Would I look at your necklace and what you're wearing and judge you? Would I look at your height and judge you? Would I look at your accent? Of course, we're judged constantly. Like, our brains are designed to find patterns and draw conclusions. So I'd say, yes, we are judged every minute of our lives. Kind of first get over it and know that you're doing it to other people too. And it's not always badly intentioned. It's just how our brains work. So there are two things there. One is, how do we think about that and try and break that paradigm? This morning, I interviewed Quentin Robinson. He's in this book, in the third chapter. He is the guy who went to Afghanistan for 8 years and has this amazing life and amazing thing he's doing now. So read about Quentin. He is this like incredibly good looking Black male dancer. And then I was interviewing him and I'm like, okay, he's like surrounded by art. He's got these amazing dreads and he's sitting in the States. I was sitting in my office. So I'm like an Asian woman in Shanghai surrounded by books. I was like, dude, can I just pause and say how different we look right now? Let's talk about that, because people will look at us or we'll look at each other and most of us would just immediately judge. Like, why are those two talking? How did they meet? Like, how can they be friends? We look as opposite as we can. We come from very opposite backgrounds, and yet we have so much in common. And he said the thing that I loved. He was like, yeah, but we have this heart thing and I love you. I see you. And I'm like, yay, Emily. And I was like, see, I'm going to totally capture that clip and put it on social media because people need to see that. And I asked him, I was like, Quentin, what do you think it is that helps you see past how a person looks to their heart? How do we all do that more? And he said a couple of things, but one thing that really struck me was it's someone's first time. He said, it's always someone's first time. It's their first time seeing you. How do you help them see you if it's their first time? Don't put it all on them and say, well, they judged me or they didn't understand me. How do we help them? He was like, when I walked in the hood he grew up in one of the most dangerous cities in America. He was like, you don't make eye contact. Even if you know someone and they're your brother, you don't look at them because then, it's going to be a confrontation. And then he was like, now he lives in Montana. And he's like, if I don't look at someone, I look like a dangerous person. And now I have to walk around and go, hi, how are you? He was so funny. But he's learned to adapt to take down the walls so that people have the best opportunity to see who he really is. So I think it goes on both sides, which is how do we not judge as much as possible and know that that is our predisposition? And then how do we help others not to judge us? How do we help them not draw conclusions?
Yeah.
The last thing I'll say to this question is, how do we not conclude why they judged us? So if somebody mistreats me, I could just draw the conclusion, oh, it's because I'm the only woman in the room. It could be because I'm Asian, or it could be because I'm American in China. It could be lots of things. You know what? It could be they hate dangly earrings and they saw these. Like, we don't know why they're treating us the way they are or why they made a comment. And I don't think there's any upside to try and identifying why they behave that way. I think the much better question to ask ourselves is, was it intentional? If it wasn't intentional or maliciously intended, then how do I want to respond to it? And normally that takes a lot of the edge off. You know, I've been in many places where I was the only woman, like coming off of a private corporate jet. Immediately, I get offers for coffee. People start throwing their blazers at me. Yes, they do. And it's not because they're all a bunch of assholes. They're not. They have, again, back to that previous comment of we are the sum of all the things we input. What does media tell us? This is why representation is important. What does my mind conclude before I even cognizantly think about it when I see 8 people come off a private jet and one's a woman? Well, then that's the responsibility of media to change that representation and change that dialogue so people don't just draw the conclusion that they should throw their jackets at me. But equally on my end, now that I'm living my life and I'm here holding your jacket, how do I want to respond? Do I immediately throw it back at you and say, just because I'm a woman, that's not going to help anybody. It doesn't build any relationships or understanding. So I can hang on to the jacket and help them find another place to put it. I can gently give it back and say, oh, you might need this later. There are many different ways we can react, but anger, defensiveness, immediately assuming why they treated you this way because of whatever label you think they're putting on you. I just don't think any of that helps.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I love the fact that you just called out and acknowledged the difference in who we are. And I think that breaks down so many barriers, right? You make that connection and people feel like they can be who they are, and we can just have a regular conversation. Well, Emily, this has been extraordinary. There's so many wonderful comments and questions about who you are, how you articulate your views, the social legacy. The book is amazing, and I'm just thrilled that I was able to speak with you today. So thank you very much for all your time. And thank you to everyone, all our fellow alumni, students, prospective students for joining us today. The Simon Women's Alliance is looking forward to partnering with you to make Simon ever better. So please stay well and thank you. Enjoy the weekend.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Jen. Thanks, Kate.